Dust swirled in the air as weary travelers passed by, their baskets balanced on their heads, their faces etched with the fatigue of a long day. The mango tree stood tall and unmoved by the evening breeze, its wide branches casting long shadows over the ground beneath it. There, under its thick shade, sat a girl. Her small frame curled into itself, her arms wrapped around her knees. She was crying, not the loud, attention-seeking wails of a child, but the silent, heartbreaking sobs of someone who had already given up hope. Her head was bowed, her fingers digging into the dusty earth as though she could bury her pain within it. People walked past her without a second glance. A man carrying a bundle of firewood paused briefly, then kept walking. A woman balancing a basket of oranges shifted her gaze away, pretending not to see. The world around her moved on, uncaring. Then, from the far end of the path, a woman approached. She was not like the others. Her feet were bare, hardened by years of toil, and her wrapper was old and faded, patched in several places. A woven basket sat on her hip, half filled with yams and a few coins from the day's sales at the market. She stopped. Her name was Martha. She had seen suffering before. She knew what it looked like. The kind that made you feel invisible. The kind that settled into your bones and made you believe that no one in the world cared. Gently, she knelt before the girl. "My child," she said softly, "why are you crying?" The girl lifted her head, startled. Her eyes were red, her cheeks stained with tears. For a moment, she looked at the woman as if unsure whether she was real. No one had stopped for her before. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Martha reached out, her calloused hand resting lightly on the girl's shoulder. "Tell me," she urged, "what is wrong?" The girl swallowed hard. I can't write my WAEC," she whispered. "My parents said they have no money for the fees. I begged them, but they told me to forget about school. They said—" Her voice cracked. "They said it's useless for a girl like me." Martha felt something tighten in her chest. She had heard those words before, years ago, in her own home. She had been told the same thing, and she had believed it. She had never learned to read or write. She had accepted that her place was on the farm, in the kitchen, with a baby on her hip before she was even old enough to understand what she wanted in life. She looked at the girl again. She saw herself. "What is your name?" she asked. "Elizabeth," the girl replied weakly. Martha nodded. "Come with me." Elizabeth hesitated. "Where?" "To your school." A flicker of hope appeared in the girl's eyes, but she quickly shook her head. "No," she said. "It's too late. The deadline was today. Even if I had the money, it wouldn't matter anymore." Martha smiled, but there was something fierce in her eyes. "Let me worry about that." She rose to her feet and extended a hand. Slowly, uncertainly, Elizabeth took it, and together, they walked down the path, leaving behind the mango tree, the dust, and the hopelessness that had almost swallowed the girl whole. The city pulsed with life, its streets humming with the restless energy of the evening rush. Cars honked impatiently as vendors shouted, selling roasted corn, fruits, and bottled drinks to weary commuters. The air smelled of dust, petrol, and frying meat from the roadside suya spots. Tall buildings loomed in the distance, their glass windows reflecting the setting sun. Elizabeth barely noticed any of it. Her legs felt weak as she walked beside Martha, her fingers gripping the woman's hand tightly. It still didn't feel real. Just hours ago, she had been sitting under the mango tree, hopeless and invisible to the world. Now, she was following a stranger to a place she had convinced herself she would never enter again. The memory of that morning clung to her, heavy and painful. She had woken up with a single thought in her mind. Today was the deadline. Her school had reminded them over and over again. If you do not pay your WAEC fees by the end of today, you will not sit for the exam. Elizabeth had barely eaten breakfast before she went to her father, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Papa, please," she had pleaded, kneeling on the cold tiled floor of their one-bedroom apartment. "I need the money for WAEC." Her father, sitting in his worn-out armchair, barely looked at her. He took a long sip from the cup of hot tea in his hands before exhaling sharply. "Elizabeth," he said, rubbing his temples. How many times do we have to go over this? She swallowed hard. But, Papa, if I don't write WAEC, I won't be able to. Do what? He snapped, finally looking at her. Do you think I have money lying around waiting for you? I work every day just to keep a roof over your head and food in your mouth. Your brothers need new school uniforms. Your younger sister needs books. And you, he shook his head. You want me to find money for an exam you might not even pass? Elizabeth's lips trembled. I will pass, she whispered. Her mother, who had been washing clothes in a plastic basin nearby, sighed. Elizabeth, leave your father alone. What is all this schooling for? Will WAEC put food on our table? Elizabeth's heart sank. Her parents had never believed in education, especially for a girl. They saw it as a waste of money, something only the wealthy could afford. Her father waved a hand dismissively. Go and find something useful to do in this house. This discussion is over. Tears burned her eyes as she stood up, her entire body shaking. She had been holding on to hope, believing that somehow her father would change his mind. But deep down, she had known the answer before she even asked. So she had left. She had walked aimlessly through the streets until she found herself under the mango tree along the path road. The world had moved around her, fast and indifferent, but she had felt frozen, drowning in the weight of her shattered dreams. And then, Martha had come. Elizabeth stole a glance at the woman walking beside her now. She still couldn't understand why a stranger had stopped for her when no one else had. Are you sure they will still allow me to register? She asked hesitantly. Martha smiled. We won't know until we try. The school came into view, a large 3-story building with blue-painted walls and a tall metal gate. A few students still lingered around, some chatting in groups, others waiting for their parents to pick them up. Elizabeth's stomach twisted with nerves as they entered. The administration block was nearly empty, except for a woman behind the reception desk and a few teachers finishing up their paperwork. Martha approached the counter, her voice firm but polite. Good evening, Ma. Please, we need to see the bursar. The receptionist looked up, eyeing Elizabeth with mild interest. The bursar is about to close for the day. Is there a problem? I want to pay for this girl's WAEC fees. Elizabeth's breath caught. Hearing those words made it feel real. The receptionist raised an eyebrow. The deadline was today, Ma. You should have come earlier. Martha nodded. I understand. But he hasn't left yet, has he? The receptionist hesitated, then sighed. Let me check. She stood up and disappeared into an office down the hall. Elizabeth fidgeted, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure Martha could hear it. Moments later, the receptionist returned. You're lucky. He says you can come in. Martha nodded in thanks and took Elizabeth's hand, leading her inside. The bursar was a middle-aged man in a neatly pressed shirt, his glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. He glanced up from his desk as they entered. You want to pay for her WAEC fees? He asked, adjusting his glasses. Yes, Martha said without hesitation. The bursar glanced at the clock on the wall. The deadline was today. I know. And you have the money? Martha reached into the folds of her wrapper and brought out a bundle of Naira notes. They were old and crumpled, but they were real. Without a word, she placed them on the table. Elizabeth watched as the bursar picked up the money, counted it carefully, and then nodded. Her name? Elizabeth opened her mouth, but no words came out. Martha gave her a small squeeze of encouragement. Elizabeth Williams, she whispered. The bursar nodded, scribbling something in his ledger before stamping a form and handing it over. She's officially registered, he said. Make sure she comes for the exam next month. Elizabeth took the paper with trembling hands. She stared at it, her vision blurring with tears. She had done it. No, Martha had done it. She turned to the woman beside her, her chest aching with gratitude. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. Martha reached out and wiped a tear from her cheek. Then don't. Just promise me one thing. Elizabeth sniffed, nodding quickly. Anything. Martha smiled. Make something of yourself. Don't let this kindness be wasted. Elizabeth clutched the registration slip to her chest, her heart swelling with a new kind of determination. One day, She would find this woman again. And when that day came, she would repay her in ways Martha could never imagine. Elizabeth's hands trembled as she clutched the WAEC registration slip. The weight of it felt heavier than paper. It was hope, a chance, a door that had been slammed in her face too many times before. And now, because of a stranger's kindness, that door had been pushed open. She walked home quickly, the city's familiar chaos pressing in around her. Cars zoomed past, vendors packed up for the day, and children laughed as they chased each other along the dusty sidewalks. But none of it registered. Her mind was racing ahead, thinking about how she would tell her parents. Would they be happy? Would they finally see how much this meant to her? She reached the narrow, overcrowded building they lived in, one of many apartment blocks stacked tightly in rows. The walls were peeling, and the air smelled of frying palm oil from a neighbor's kitchen. She climbed the stairs, her breath uneven, and pushed open the door to their one-room apartment. Inside, her mother sat on a small wooden stool, slicing vegetables into a metal bowl. Her father lay on the thin mattress in the corner, his arm thrown over his eyes, resting after a long day. Her younger siblings were gathered on the floor, scribbling on old exercise books. Elizabeth stepped in hesitantly, her heart pounding. "Mama, Papa." Her voice was quiet but urgent. Her mother barely glanced up. "Where have you been?" I have something to tell you," she said, her fingers tightening around the paper in her hand. Her father sighed, shifting slightly. "What is it now?" Elizabeth stepped closer, unable to contain the rush of words. "I can take my WAEC this year." That made her mother pause. Her father sat up slowly, frowning. "What are you talking about?" he asked. Elizabeth took a deep breath. "A woman, I don't know her name. She saw me crying today and asked what was wrong. When I told her, she took me to my school and paid for my registration." For a moment, there was silence. Then her mother set down her knife. "A stranger gave you money?" "She didn't give it to me. She paid it directly to the school," Elizabeth clarified quickly. "She just wanted to help." Her father's expression darkened. "And what does she want in return?" "Nothing." Elizabeth shook her head. "She only asked me to do well in my exams." Her mother interrupted with a short laugh, shaking her head. "People don't just give away money for nothing, Elizabeth. You think she doesn't have her own children to take care of? Be careful. Nothing in this life is free." Elizabeth's heart dropped. "Mama, she didn't ask for anything. She just wanted to help." Her father rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "So now you think you are better than your mother and me? Running around, accepting favors from strangers? That's not what I—" "And what if she comes back one day, demanding something in return?" her mother added. "What will you do then?" Elizabeth's throat tightened. "She won't. She's not like that." Her father scoffed. "You don't know that." Elizabeth looked between them, disbelief crashing over her. "She changed my life today, and you won't even say thank you?" Her mother sighed, wiping her hands on her wrapper. "There's no need for all that. You're wasting time thinking about this school nonsense. Very soon, we'll find a good man for you, and you won't have to worry about WAEC or anything else." Elizabeth felt like the air had been knocked from her lungs. "What?" Her father nodded in agreement. "Your mother is right. This school idea is foolishness. You're 16. It's time to start thinking about marriage. We will find a responsible man who will take care of you." Elizabeth shook her head violently. "No, I don't want to get married. I want to be a doctor." Her mother sighed as if she were dealing with a stubborn child. "And what will a doctor's certificate do for you? You think life is that simple? Women are meant to marry and take care of their homes. This education dream of yours will only make things harder." Elizabeth's vision blurred with tears. "How can you say that?" she whispered. "How can you want me to throw my life away?" Her father's eyes hardened. "Mind how you speak to us, Elizabeth." Her voice trembled, but she didn't back down. "I don't want a husband. I want an education. I want to be a doctor." Her mother shook her head and picked up the knife again. "Enough of this foolishness. Go and fetch water from the tap outside." Elizabeth stood frozen, gripping the WEC slip in her hands, watching as her parents dismissed her dreams as if they were nothing more than childish fantasies. Her chest ached with something deep and sharp. They didn't care. No matter how hard she fought, they would never care. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she wiped it away angrily. Fine. If they wouldn't support her, she would do it on her own. She would pass WAEC. She would go to university. She would become a doctor. And one day, she would leave this house and never look back. The weeks leading up to Elizabeth's WAEC exams were the hardest she had ever faced. At home, nothing had changed. Her parents still spoke of her marriage as though it were already decided. Each day, her mother hinted at possible suitors, men with stable jobs, men who could provide, men who, in their eyes, were the only future a girl like Elizabeth needed. But Elizabeth had no interest in any of them. While her mother planned for her wedding, she studied deep into the night, poring over borrowed textbooks by candlelight. She would wake up before dawn to revise and sneak in extra study time between house chores. The weight of expectation sat heavily on her, but she refused to crumble beneath it. She had one shot at this, and she would not fail. The WAEC exams came and went in a blur of tension, ink-stained fingers, and whispered prayers. Elizabeth wrote each paper with unwavering determination, pouring everything she had into each answer sheet. When the last exam ended, she felt both relief and fear. Had she done enough? But there was no time to dwell on it. Days later, news spread about a government-sponsored scholarship exam for students from low-income families. It was a rare opportunity, one that could open doors she had never even dreamed of. Elizabeth knew she had to try. She found out where the exams were taking place and signed up without telling her parents. She couldn't risk them stopping her. The exam day arrived, and as she entered the hall, she saw students from all over the city, their faces filled with the same hope and desperation she carried in her heart. She took a deep breath and picked up her pen. For 2 hours, she poured herself into the test, answering each question with the same fierce determination that had carried her this far. When she left the hall, she had no idea whether she had done well enough. All she could do now was wait. While Elizabeth waited for her WAEC and scholarship results, her parents intensified their search for a husband. Her mother began calling distant relatives, inquiring about responsible young men. Her father even met with an elder in the community to discuss potential matches. Elizabeth overheard their conversations and felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. "She's a good girl," her mother said one evening as she chopped vegetables. "She knows how to cook and clean. She will make a fine wife." Elizabeth clenched her fists. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell them that she was more than just a girl who could cook and clean. She wanted to be someone. She wanted to make a difference. She spent many nights praying, asking God to make a way for her. She prayed that her results would be good, that she would get the scholarship, that she wouldn't have to be trapped in a life she didn't want. And then, one afternoon, everything changed. Elizabeth was in the market with her mother when she heard someone call her name. She turned to see one of her classmates running toward her, breathless with excitement. "Elizabeth," the girl gasped, "your WAEC results are out." Elizabeth's heart stopped. "And the scholarship results too." The world seemed to spin. "Did you check?" Elizabeth asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The girl grinned. "You passed everything, and you got the scholarship." For a moment, Elizabeth couldn't move. She had passed. She had passed. And she had won the scholarship. A sob of relief escaped her lips, but she quickly covered her mouth, afraid that her mother would notice. She felt like running, like screaming, like falling to her knees in gratitude. But she couldn't. Not yet. She needed to do one more thing first. That evening, when her parents were busy talking about suitors, Elizabeth snuck out. She had memorized the address the woman had given her and followed the directions until she reached the house. It was a modest place, small but well kept, with a neat garden in front. She knocked on the door, her heart pounding. A few seconds later, the door opened, and there stood Martha. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Elizabeth held out the results with shaking hands. "I did it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I passed WAEC, and I got the scholarship. I'm going to America." Martha's eyes filled with tears. She took the papers from Elizabeth's hands and read them carefully. Then, without a word, she pulled Elizabeth into a tight embrace. "You did it," she whispered against her hair. "I knew you would." Elizabeth sobbed against her shoulder, releasing all the emotions she had been holding in for so long. Martha pulled back and cupped her face. "I'm so proud of you." Elizabeth wiped her tears. "I wouldn't have done it without you." Martha smiled, shaking her head. "No, Elizabeth, this was all you. You fought for it. You earned it." She stepped inside for a moment and returned with an envelope. "Take this," she said, pressing it into Elizabeth's hands. Elizabeth looked down at it, confused. "What is it?" "Just a little money to help with your journey," Martha said. "You'll need something when you get there." Elizabeth felt fresh tears sting her eyes. "I can't." "You can," Martha said firmly. "And you will." Elizabeth clutched the envelope to her chest. She had no words big enough to express what she felt. All she could do was hug Martha again. Weeks later, Elizabeth stood at the airport, her passport and visa in hand. Her parents had barely acknowledged her departure. Her mother had simply sighed, shaking her head. "You'll come back and realize we were right," she had said. Her father had only grunted in response. They didn't understand, and maybe they never would. But Elizabeth knew one thing for sure. She was never coming back to the life they had planned for her. She was going to America. She was going to be a doctor. And she would make sure that Martha's kindness was never in vain. As she walked towards the gate, she whispered a silent prayer of thanks. This was only the beginning. Years rolled by, and before you know it, Elizabeth was done with her studies. She was the best graduating student in her class. And while she was receiving her award, the one person she wanted close to her was Martha, the woman who made everything possible for her. The wheels of the plane screeched against the runway as Elizabeth looked out of the window, her heart pounding. Nigeria, home. It had been 10 long years. 10 years of studying, of growing, of fighting for a dream no one but her had believed in. And now, she was back. Not just as Elizabeth, the girl whose parents wanted to marry her off, but as Dr. Elizabeth Adams. A doctor. A woman who had defied every odd, every obstacle. Yet, as the plane taxied to a stop and the seatbelt signs dimmed, she felt no joy, no triumph. Because the first thing she needed to do was find the woman who had made it all possible. Martha. The moment she stepped into the airport, she barely paid attention to the sea of faces or the distant hum of conversations. She grabbed her suitcase and walked briskly toward the exit, her heart set on one thing. She was going to find Martha. The city had changed. New buildings had risen, old ones had crumbled, and the air felt heavier, thicker with the weight of time. As Elizabeth's taxi wove through the streets, she felt a strange unease settle in her chest. Would Martha recognize her? Would she be surprised? Happy? Had she been okay all these years? The car stopped in front of the old yard, the place where everything had begun. But something was wrong. The yard wasn't the same. The rusted iron gate was gone, replaced by a new, modern one. The small compound that had once been filled with the laughter of playing children was eerily quiet. Elizabeth stepped out, dragging her suitcase behind her, and approached a woman washing clothes in a basin. "Excuse me," Elizabeth said, her voice eager but nervous. "I'm looking for a woman who used to live here. Her name is Martha. She had children too, I think. Do you know where she is?" The woman frowned, glancing up. "Martha?"
Yes.
Elizabeth's heart leaped. The woman wiped her hands on her wrapper and shook her head. "Ah, my dear. They packed out years ago." The world tilted slightly. Elizabeth blinked. "Packed out?" "Yes," the woman continued. "It's been long. Almost 7, 8 years now. Nobody knows where they went. One day, they just left. People said it was because things became hard for them." Elizabeth's stomach clenched. "No one knows where they are?" The woman sighed. "Not that I've heard." Elizabeth took a step back, her breath unsteady. She had come back hoping to embrace the woman who had given her a future. She had imagined surprising her with success, with gratitude, with everything she had become. But Martha was gone, vanished, and no one knew where she had gone. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her suitcase as an overwhelming sadness washed over her. She had wanted to repay her, to show her that her kindness had not been in vain. Now, She might never get the chance. Elizabeth's heart was heavy as she took a taxi to her parents' house. She had barely spoken to them in years. They had never called to ask how she was doing, never written. But now that she was back, a doctor, a woman of status, they were suddenly eager to welcome her. The moment she stepped into the house, her mother let out a loud cry of joy, pulling her into a tight embrace. My daughter is back." Her father, who had once dismissed her dreams, now stood with pride in his eyes. "Dr. Elizabeth," he said, testing the title on his tongue as if savoring it. Her younger siblings, now older, stood by with wide grins, excited to see the sister they barely knew anymore. They celebrated her return, talking about how proud they were, how she had made a name for herself. But Elizabeth barely heard them. She smiled when expected, nodded when necessary. But inside, she was empty. Because Martha was gone. Because the one person she truly wanted to see, to thank, to embrace, was nowhere to be found. That night, she sat by the window, staring out into the city lights, her heart aching. This wasn't home anymore. She had outgrown it, and she could feel it in her bones. She wasn't meant to stay here. A few weeks later, Elizabeth left for Lagos. It wasn't a decision she made lightly, but it was one she knew was necessary. She needed to build something new, a place where she could help people, where she could make a difference. With her savings and connections, she bought land and began construction on what would soon become one of the most reputable private hospitals in Lagos. She threw herself into work, determined to save lives, to give others the same chance she had been given. But no matter how many patients she treated, no matter how much success she achieved, there was always a hollow space in her heart. A question that refused to leave her mind. Where was Martha? And would she ever find her again? The hospital was unusually busy that evening. Elizabeth had just finished her rounds when she heard the commotion at the reception. A woman had been rushed in on a stretcher. The nurses moved quickly, but their voices were tense as they spoke to the patient's daughter, who was visibly distressed. "You need to make a deposit before we can proceed," one of the nurses explained. The young woman, no older than 20, shook her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Please," she begged. "We have no money. But my mother, she's in so much pain. Please help her." Elizabeth, standing by the hallway, paused. She had heard this plea countless times before. The reality of private hospitals was cruel. Without payment, treatment was often delayed. But something in the girl's voice pulled at her. Still, she turned away. She was exhausted. Another patient would mean another long night, and she had already had so many of those. But hours passed, and something kept tugging at her. The desperation in the girl's voice. The way she had pleaded. Something felt different. Finally, unable to ignore it any longer, Elizabeth made her way toward the emergency ward. She stepped inside, scanning the room until her eyes fell on the patient lying on the bed. And then, the world stopped. Elizabeth's breath hitched. Her hands trembled. It couldn't be, but it was. Martha, the woman she had searched for. The woman who had made her dreams possible. Time seemed to fold in on itself. The years disappeared, and suddenly, Elizabeth was 16 again. Standing under that mango tree, looking up at the kind stranger who had changed her life. "Martha," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Martha's eyes were closed, her face pale and weary. She was barely conscious. Elizabeth didn't think. She spun around, pushing the emergency button with force. "Get me every available doctor in here now," she commanded, her voice sharp with urgency. The nurses and doctors rushed in, startled by the authority in her voice. Elizabeth turned back to Martha and gripped her frail hand. "You're going to be okay. Your daughter is here to take care of you," she whispered. "I promise." The next morning, Martha's daughter sat in the waiting area, her fingers twisting anxiously. She had seen the way the doctors had reacted last night, the way they had moved with urgency, without once asking her for money. She had expected them to throw her and her mother out, but instead, they had treated her mother with care. And now, the confusion only deepened. Every morning, nurses came with fresh meals for her mother. They smiled at her, reassuring her that everything was fine, yet not once had they mentioned money. Not once had they asked her for a single naira. Who was this doctor? And why was she treating them as though they were special? She had no idea that the woman saving her mother's life was the same girl her mother had saved many years ago. The first thing Martha saw when she opened her eyes was a bright white ceiling. She blinked slowly, disoriented. Where was she? Her body felt lighter, though weak. There was no longer the unbearable pain in her chest. The last thing she remembered was struggling to breathe, her daughter's voice crying for help. But now, she was alive. She turned her head slightly and saw her daughter sitting beside the bed, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Mother!" the girl gasped, rushing forward. "You're awake." Martha tried to speak, but her throat was dry. A nurse appeared instantly, holding a glass of water to her lips. "Take it easy," she said gently. "You're safe now." Safe. Martha let the words settle in her heart. For years, she had battled hardship. Ever since she and her children had left their old home, life had been unkind. But now, for the first time in a long time, she felt a strange sense of peace. And then, the door opened. A woman stepped inside, dressed in a doctor's coat. Martha studied her face, tall, graceful, confident. There was something familiar about her, but she couldn't place it. "How are you feeling?" the doctor asked with a kind smile. "Better," Martha said weakly. I don't know how to thank you." The doctor hesitated, as if searching for the right words. Then, she stepped closer and spoke softly. "Mama, do you know me?" Elizabeth asked, smiling. "No, I have never been here before." Martha answered. "Mama, do you remember a 16-year-old girl you once helped?" Martha frowned, confusion clouding her features. "A girl?" "Yes," Elizabeth said, her voice thick with emotion. "A girl crying under a mango tree. A girl whose parents refused to pay for her WAEC." Martha's expression shifted slightly, her brows knitting together as if grasping at a distant memory. Elizabeth took a deep breath and knelt beside the bed. "Mama," she whispered, her voice breaking. "That girl was me." Martha's eyes widened. She studied the doctor again, and slowly, like a sunrise breaking through the night, the memory returned. The crying girl, the desperate plea, the day she had reached into her small bag of market earnings and paid for a stranger's future. Martha's lips parted, trembling. "No, it can't be." Tears welled in Elizabeth's eyes. "It is me, Mama. I am Elizabeth," Martha gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Her weak body trembled as realization dawned. The little girl she had once saved had returned. Now a woman, now a doctor, now the very person who had saved her life. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Oh, my child," she whispered, reaching for Elizabeth's hands. "You made it?" Elizabeth nodded, her own tears falling freely. "I made it. Because of you." Martha sobbed, gripping her hands tightly. "Oh, thank you, Jesus. Thank you." For a long time, they held each other, letting the years of separation melt away. After Martha was discharged, Elizabeth did not let her go back to suffering. She moved Martha and her children into a comfortable home. She made sure they never lacked again. Her daughter, who had been waiting for her JAM results, passed excellently. Without hesitation, Elizabeth sponsored her studies abroad, just as she had once been sponsored. Her son, who had struggled to make ends meet, was given an opportunity as well. And Martha? Elizabeth set up a thriving business for her, so that she would never have to struggle again. But beyond that, Elizabeth told their story. She shared it with people far and wide, a testimony of how one small act of kindness could change a life forever. And in doing so, she inspired many. She had been a girl crying under a tree, and now she was a woman lifting others up, all because one woman had stopped. One woman had cared. The story of Elizabeth and Martha spread like wildfire. People were moved to tears when they heard how a poor farmer had paid for a stranger's WEC, never knowing that the girl would one day become a doctor and save her life. Many came forward, offering support. Some donated to Martha's new business, others offered scholarships to children in need, inspired by Elizabeth's journey. One evening, Elizabeth sat with Martha in her new home, a warm, comfortable place far from the struggles of their past. Martha looked around in disbelief. "Elizabeth, I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "I never imagined I would live to see a day like this." Elizabeth reached for her hands, squeezing them gently. "Mama, you already thanked me years ago, when you stopped for me under that tree." Martha's eyes filled with fresh tears. "I never expected anything in return." "And that," Elizabeth said, her voice thick with emotion, "is why God rewarded you." Martha wiped her tears, smiling. "I only wish your parents had come to thank me back then." Elizabeth stiffened at the mention of her parents. They had never believed in her dreams. Even when she returned from the US as a doctor, they had been happy, but they never truly understood the weight of what had happened. They had expected her to marry young, to settle for an ordinary life. But she had wanted more. And now, looking at Martha, this woman who had done more for her than her own parents, she knew that true family was not always by blood, but by love. Martha seemed to read her thoughts. She reached forward and cupped Elizabeth's face. "My daughter," she whispered, "you have made me proud." For the first time in years, Elizabeth felt something heal inside her. The months that followed were filled with joy. Martha's daughter flourished abroad, sending messages of gratitude every week. Her son, with the business Elizabeth set up, became independent and successful. And Elizabeth? She continued running her hospital with a renewed purpose, helping those who couldn't afford treatment, just as Martha had once helped her. One day, while standing in her hospital lobby, she overheard a conversation between two young girls. One of them sighed. "I wish I could be a doctor one day, but my parents can't afford my WAEC fees." Elizabeth felt a lump in her throat. She stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "Tell me," she said softly, "how much are your fees?" The girl looked up, startled. Elizabeth smiled. "Because someone once paid mine, and today, it's my turn to do the same." And just like that, the cycle continued. Because kindness never truly ends. It only passes from one hand to another, from one heart to the next, changing lives forever.